He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just smiled, then threw the coffee straight into my face. The boiling liquid struck my cheek and neck like a slap from hell. I gasped, stunned by the searing pain. The shock of it, then watched as Gregory Von calmly picked up his leather briefcase and walked out of the conference room like nothing had happened. I sat there, drenched, trembling, in front of the company's corporate attorney and the head of HR, too stunned to speak. No one moved. No one offered help. Only the quiet hiss of the coffee pooling across the table filled the air. That was the moment I decided I was done being quiet. My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 6 years, I worked as a biomedical engineer at Medtronic Systems in Austin. I had just developed a revolutionary cancer drug delivery system, and the moment I refused to sign over the patent, Gregory lost control. What he didn't know, what no one in that room realized, was that I had recorded the entire meeting from the moment I walked in. His threats, his manipulation, and finally his assault. But to understand how I got here, we have to go back, years back, to a Christmas morning when I was 8 years old. I tore the paper off a box to find a real microscope. Not a toy, but a real working microscope. My grandfather, who had already been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer by then, sat beside me and helped me examine fibers from the carpet, dust from the windowsill, even cells scraped from my cheek. "Someday," he whispered as I peered through the lens, "you might discover something that saves someone like me." 3 months later, I watched him take his final breath in hospice care. That was the day I made a promise, not to anyone else, just to myself. I would chase answers for people like him. In high school, I obsessed over biology and chemistry while my friends flirted with boys or worried about homecoming. I graduated valedictorian. My parents, both teachers, were supportive but cautious. "We just want you to be able to support yourself," my mom would say gently, steering me toward pharmacy or nursing. "Research is so unstable, sweetheart." But I couldn't let it go. College was brutal. Scholarships paid for tuition, but everything else? Rent, food, lab materials. I worked a graveyard shift at a 24-hour CVS, stocked shelves, survived on black coffee and power bars. Graduate school was worse. The pressure was relentless, and most nights I fell asleep, still wearing a lab coat, notes stuck to my face. But I pushed through because I had to, because giving up would have meant breaking that promise. When I got the offer from Medtronics 6 years ago, I cried right there on the call. They were known for cutting-edge cancer therapies, big NIH grants, and a reputation for integrity. I thought, this is it. This is where I'll finally make a difference. During onboarding, the HR director had told me, "We believe in innovation and protect our inventors. If you create something, you have rights." I believed her. I held on to that policy like a lifeline. My department head, Gregory Vaughn, was charming at first. Tall, silver-haired, always in perfectly tailored suits. He called me kiddo in meetings, said he saw real potential in me. But even then, there was something cold in his eyes, something performative. Still, I was too eager to please, too desperate to prove myself to care. I nodded. I smiled. I buried my unease under a mountain of grant proposals and lab trials. Then, 6 months in, I watched a colleague, Diane, present a breakthrough in diagnostic accuracy. A week later, at the quarterly board meeting, Gregory took the credit for her work, barely mentioning her name. Diane resigned shortly after. When I asked why, she simply said, "It's not worth it." I should have listened. I should have paid attention. But I didn't. I buried myself in my side project. Nights, weekends, holidays, alone in the lab with nothing but pipettes and fluorescent scanners and the hum of equipment for company. What I was working on wasn't theoretical. It was real, nanoscale carriers designed to deliver chemo directly to malignant cells, sparing the healthy ones. It had been tried before, yes, but no one had cracked the coding. Mine did. The first successful mouse trial changed everything. The tumors shrank, by over 60% with zero collateral damage. I couldn't sleep that night, not from anxiety but adrenaline. It felt like I had stumbled into the future. Like maybe, just maybe, this was the thing I was born to do. I followed protocol. I logged every hour, every reagent, every material used. And before I presented it to anyone, I used my own savings to file a provisional patent in my name. That's what Section 4.7 of company policy guaranteed. The inventor retained primary rights, and the company negotiated licensing if commercialized. I thought I was safe. I didn't know then that Gregory Vaughn had already promised a miracle cure to the board. I didn't know he'd been watching my lab time more closely than anyone realized. I didn't know I was walking into a storm, one that would leave me bruised, burned, and fighting for everything I had worked for. But I would learn. And when I did, I wouldn't run. I would fight. And this time, I would not fight quietly. The moment I presented my research to the department, I knew the room had shifted. There was a stillness, not boredom or distraction, but something sharper, more focused. The kind of attention people give when they realize the stakes are higher than they thought. I stood at the head of the conference table, laser pointer in hand, explaining how the nanocarriers could identify tumor markers, bypass healthy tissue, and release their payload only when inside malignant cells. 20 minutes. Clean data. Clear results. When I finished, the questions came fast, technical, probing, enthusiastic. But then came Gregory's voice, calm and measured. "When did you begin this line of research?" he asked, eyes narrowed. I don't recall authorizing this direction. I explained that it had been a personal project, pursued during evenings and weekends, logged properly, within policy. He nodded, but I saw it, the flicker of calculation behind his smile. "Well," he said, "this certainly seems promising. The company will want full access to your data for review." "Of course," I replied. "And I should mention, I filed a provisional patent last week, under my name, in accordance with Section 4.7. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The room didn't get louder. It got colder. I swear I saw Gregory's smile freeze like wet concrete in winter. He dismissed the meeting shortly after, his voice a little too tight. Jason, Ethan, really, but everyone at the company called him Jason out of habit, gave me a subtle thumbs up as we filed out. But that was the last easy moment I had in that building. Within 48 hours, the cracks began forming. My login credentials suddenly failed for certain internal systems. Equipment I'd booked was mysteriously under maintenance. A shipment of reagents I needed was rerouted by mistake to another lab. At first, I brushed it off as coincidence. But then, one night after staying late to process samples, I noticed something strange. My lab notebook, the one I always kept locked in a desk drawer. It had been moved, just slightly, enough for me to notice. The corners weren't aligned the way I left them. The ribbon marker was tucked into a different page. It was small, subtle, but to a researcher, it was like someone had touched your brain. I checked the security logs the next morning. Someone had accessed the lab after hours using Gregory's badge. 11:43 p.m. in, 12:17 a.m. out. I knew he sometimes worked late, but in my space, alone, that was no coincidence. That night, I bought a discreet security camera. Something small, black, low profile, easily hidden behind a jar of Agro's powder on my top shelf. I synced it to my personal cloud. No company servers. No gups. If someone came back, I'd have proof. Jason noticed my change in demeanor. "You okay?" he asked one morning by the coffee machine. I hesitated, then told him everything: the lab access, the notebook, the feeling that I was being watched. He sighed, then leaned in. "Remember Eliza Crawford?" he whispered. "Eliza, from antibody research? She left last year." "She didn't just leave," he said. "She was developing a breakthrough therapy. Filed a provisional patent, just like you. Gregory pressured her to sign it over. She refused. Suddenly, she was accused of violating data protocols and was threatened with an FDA investigation. She gave up everything and disappeared. A chill ran down my spine. Why didn't anyone say anything? I asked. Because most of us are one bad week away from losing everything. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I created a separate record, offline, encrypted, detailing every step of my research. I backed up every document, every dataset, every time-stamped photo. I made copies of emails, log conversations, even started carrying a small audio recorder, clipped inside my bag for every informal chat. The next week, I was summoned by HR. Linda Warren from Human Resources greeted me with her usual tight smile, offering me herbal tea and complimenting my blouse before sliding a thick agreement across the table. "This is standard," she said, "just to clarify that any innovation done under company supervision belongs to Metatronics." I flipped through the document. Standard? It revoked all inventor rights. It transferred full patent ownership to the company with no royalty provision, just a performance bonus pending approval. It would have gutted everything I had built. "I'd like my attorney to review this before signing," I said. Linda's smile thinned. "That won't be necessary. Our legal team ensures everything is compliant." "I insist," I replied, standing. Her eyes narrowed. "Very well, but don't wait too long. Opportunities can disappear." Back in the lab, I found Jason waiting. His eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me. "Marcus got a performance bonus last quarter. Quiet, tied to department innovation leadership." I froze. That bonus had been issued before my research was even shared with the board. And then I overheard it, passing Gregory's office one afternoon. I caught his voice, low but unmistakable. "Don't worry about the patent. She'll fold. She has no leverage." Except I did. I had leverage. And for the first time, I realized just how dangerous that made me in his world. That was the moment I stopped hoping the system would protect me and started preparing for war. I thought things had already gotten bad. I was wrong. The real descent began after I refused to sign the HR document. It didn't happen with a bang. There was no formal memo, no accusations shouted across conference rooms. It came in quiet withdrawals, like oxygen being slowly sucked out of a room. One day, the calibration tech I'd worked with for 3 years stopped replying to my emails. Another day, I walked into the staff lounge and everyone went silent, not awkward silence, but guilty, shifting silence, like they knew something I didn't. By the end of that week, I was eating lunch alone in my car. Requests for assistance were met with "sorry, swamped today." Shared drives I had previously contributed to suddenly revoked my access. Even Jason, though supportive, began meeting me only in the parking lot, away from prying eyes. "They're saying you're refusing standard protocols," he said quietly one morning, looking exhausted. "Marcus called a departmental meeting while you were out. Framed you as someone who's jeopardizing a major breakthrough." I stared at him. "They're isolating me." "They're doing worse than that," he replied. "They're rewriting the narrative." That afternoon, I returned to my lab and found the temperature controls for my testing chamber had been tampered with. The fluctuations were subtle, barely noticeable if you weren't monitoring constantly. But for what I was working on, it could destroy months of results. Then came the IT email. "We need to confiscate your laptop for routine system verification. A loaner will be provided in the interim." I knew what it meant. When I got it back 3 days later, the battery logging was different. A hidden folder had been opened and closed again. The screen brightness settings had changed. Little things, but unmistakable. They had gone digging, looking for anything they could twist. Fortunately, I had kept my core data backed up on an encrypted personal cloud. More importantly, the notebook with the most sensitive notes never left my bag. But even that began to feel like a fragile defense. One morning, my badge stopped working for the equipment wing. I was told I needed supervisor approval for access. approval that mysteriously took hours, sometimes days. By then, the instruments were booked. Research deadlines slipped. Then came whispers. Someone in the break room speculated that I had stretched sample sizes in my trials. Another hinted I had used unapproved compounds. Nothing direct, just fragments seeded into conversations by people pretending to be curious. I knew where it was coming from. Marcus wasn't just trying to break me legally, he was poisoning my credibility. And then, as if to drive the point home, Jason was reassigned. Just like that. New project across campus, he told me on a call. No warning. No explanation. He paused, then added, Lauren, they're trying to crush you. Slowly. I believed him, especially after I received the anonymous email. Watch your back. Vaughn has ended careers before. Patent in your name makes you a threat. There was no signature. The account had been created that morning and deleted minutes later. But the message rang loud and clear. I wasn't paranoid. I was a target. So I escalated. Every conversation with management I recorded. Every access denial. Every coincidental glitch. Every missed shipment. Documented with timestamps and screenshots. I kept a personal log of everything from the moment I stepped into the building to the second I left. I stopped leaving things unattended, even for coffee breaks. My lab coat never stayed on the same hook twice. I met again with Clara Donovan, the attorney I'd quietly retained after the first HR incident. She listened to everything. The notebook tampering, the software lockouts, the threats disguised as policy. You're doing everything right, she said after a long pause. But I need to be honest, this won't stay quiet. They're escalating. Eventually, they'll try to force termination. I won't give them a reason. They'll fabricate one if they need to. And just like clockwork, the next blow came dressed as a promotion. A meeting invite from Marcus. Executive Conference Room B. 8:30 a.m. mandatory. The title? Project Prioritization Strategy Discussion. I knew that wasn't what it was. This wasn't a discussion. This was the trap. I barely slept that night. I laid out my clothes like armor, navy blazer, white blouse, flat shoes for stability. I triple-checked that my phone was fully charged and recording before I entered the elevator the next morning. As it rose to the executive floor, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored panel. I looked tired, hollow, but also ready. Marcus was already there when I arrived, seated at the head of the polished table like a king in a courtroom. Beside him sat Linda from HR and Walter Simmons, the company's general counsel. 3 chairs, one of me. They smiled as I entered. Lauren, good to see you, Marcus said, pouring himself coffee. The smell hit me hard, too hard, and something deep in my gut whispered, this is it. The air in conference room B was heavy, like it had been waiting for something to explode. Gregory gestured to the seat across from him. Let's talk, he said, as if this were just a casual check-in between colleagues. Linda offered a perfunctory nod. Walter Simmons adjusted his glasses and slid a document folder toward me. We're here to clarify the company's position regarding your recent project, Walter began. Metatronics views your work as integral to our long-term strategic goals. The board is invested in ensuring continuity. I said nothing, just opened the folder. The paperwork was thick, glossy, full of legal language. But the core was simple. It demanded complete transfer of my patent rights to the company. I would still be listed as the primary researcher, but not the inventor. There would be no royalties, no licensing agreement, just a flat one-time bonus and a vague promise of future consideration. I've reviewed company policy thoroughly, I said calmly. Section 4.7 grants inventors the right to retain patent ownership. I'm open to licensing negotiations, but I won't sign over full ownership. Walter's mouth tightened. This situation falls under a special clause, strategic innovation that directly impacts company valuation. That clause requires pre-approval, I countered. My project was self-directed. logged after hours, and fully documented. Linda glanced at Gregory. Her posture stiffened. Perhaps we can find a middle ground, she offered. Shared rights, tiered royalties. But Gregory cut her off with a single raised hand. That won't be necessary, he said sharply. Lauren and I can finish this. They exchanged glances. Linda and Walter stood, gathered their materials, and quietly left the room. And just like that, we were alone. The shift in energy was immediate. Gregory leaned back in his chair, dropped the performative smile, and stared at me with something cold and ugly. Listen carefully, he said. That patent belongs to Metatronics. To me. I didn't flinch. You're wrong. I followed every policy to the letter. He slammed his palm flat against the table. You think any of that matters? I built this department. I control the narrative. I control the funding. You're a mid-level researcher with no leverage. I have proof, I said quietly. Lab records, lab logs, time-stamped backups. And this, I tapped the pocket where my phone sat, still recording. I'm not alone this time. His face flushed. A vein pulsed at his temple. You ungrateful little brat, he hissed. Do you know what I've done to get you here? You think you'd have had this chance without me clearing your project from the budget? Without me protecting your early results from review? I don't recall you mentioning that at the board meetings, I replied. You were too busy taking credit. He stood abruptly. You want a war? Fine, but you won't survive it. And then, with a speed that caught me completely off guard, he picked up his full coffee cup and threw it. Scalding heat exploded across my face and neck. I cried out, the sound involuntary raw. My hands instinctively flew to my cheek. I could feel my skin burn beneath my fingertips. My blouse clung wetly to my chest. The air stank of bitterness and steam. Gregory didn't rush to help. He didn't apologize. He just stood there, eyes wide with fury, then sneered. That was an accident, he said coolly. If you tell anyone otherwise, no one will believe you. I'll make sure of it. And then he left. I sat motionless, dripping, shaking, breath shallow and fast. I reached into my pocket, turned off the recording, and stared at the device in my hand. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. In the executive bathroom, I dabbed at the burns with damp paper towels. Red streaks bloomed across my cheek, my neck, the top of my chest. The pain wasn't the worst part, it was the violation. The final, deliberate act meant to humiliate, to silence. But something inside me had already shifted. I wasn't going back into that room. I walked down to my lab, removed my ID badge, placed it on my desk, and packed my few belongings into a cardboard box. As I walked out, no one said anything. Some looked away. Others stared. No one stopped me. At the security desk, the guard barely glanced up. Reason for exit, he asked automatically. I held his gaze. Loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, I said, effective immediately, I resign. My supervisor just threw hot coffee in my face because I wouldn't sign over my pat rights. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt in that company. His eyes widened. Ma'am, do you need medical attention? Yes, I said. My voice cracked. But first, I need to get out of this building. In my car, the pain finally broke through the adrenaline. My skin throbbed. My chest ached. And my entire career, 6 years of 4 a.m. Lab sessions, missed birthdays, strained relationships, felt like it had collapsed under the weight of one paper cup. I allowed myself 5 minutes to cry. Then I started the engine. This wasn't the end. This was the first step toward something bigger. And I wasn't running. Not anymore. The ER doctor confirmed what I already knew. First-degree burns on my cheek and neck, and a small patch of second-degree damage where the coffee had been hottest. You're lucky it wasn't worse, she said gently, applying burn cream with gloved hands. Coffee served at nearly 175 degrees. It doesn't take long to leave permanent scars. I winced. Will they fade? With care, most likely. But you'll need to keep the area protected, out of the sun, moisturized. And you should report this. It's a workplace injury. Legally, they're required to document it. I nodded, but my mind was already somewhere else. I wasn't thinking about paperwork. I was thinking about Gregory's face, his voice, his threat. No one will believe you. I was thinking about proving him wrong. Before I left the hospital, Jason showed up with a cardboard box in his arms. He looked pale, furious. I heard what happened, he said. I didn't know where else to look, so I started calling hospitals. I brought your things from the lab, your bag, your backup drives, and he tapped the top of the box. Your notebook. I found it hidden behind the autoclave where you told me to stash it if anything ever happened. My throat tightened. You're risking your job. I don't care. What he did, it was assault. And people saw you leaving. Word spreading. Some are already asking questions. I didn't respond. I was staring at my phone. A new text had come in, anonymous number. Return all company materials immediately. Retaining proprietary data is grounds for legal action. Gregory Von Jason saw the message. They've already locked you out of the system, he said. Marcus is spinning the story. Said you became hysterical during a performance review and knocked the coffee over yourself. I met his eyes. I have the recording. His jaw dropped. All of it. Start to finish, including the part where he threatened to ruin my life. He sat down slowly. Then he's done. That night, I met with Clara Donovan again, sitting in her dimly lit office with my still burning skin wrapped in gauze. I played her the recording, watched her expression darken with each passing second. This is assault. No question, she said. And combined with the ongoing harassment, sabotage, and threats, you have a serious legal case. Harassment, hostile work environment, retaliation, battery, and crucially, intellectual property coercion. Where do we start? I asked. First, we document everything, medical reports, photos, witness statements, your logs. Then we notify the company's board that we intend to pursue legal action unless they respond in good faith. We move quickly before they control the narrative. The next morning, that window was already closing. A leaked memo landed in my inbox, forwarded by a sympathetic former colleague. Metatronics was preparing to claim ownership of my research. Gregory had already filed an internal report stating that I developed the delivery system under direct supervision and that I'd refused multiple opportunities to collaborate on the official filing. They weren't just going to fight me. They were going to erase me. Clara was blunt. They're moving fast because they're scared. That's a good thing. But we'll need allies. Help came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the incident, I received an email from Dr. Celia Marquez, my former mentor in grad school, now leading R&D at a smaller but rising biotech company called Ardentia Labs. I heard what happened, she wrote, and I'm furious. If you're willing, I'd like to discuss options for collaboration and interim support. You shouldn't have to face this alone. We met at a quiet cafe off South Lamar. She'd read my patent filing, had heard the rumors, and most importantly, she believed me. Your delivery system is real. It works. And it could change how we treat cancer, she said, eyes sharp but kind. Ardentia's board is interested in licensing the tech, once your rights are legally protected. In the meantime, we can offer consulting work, give you time and space to keep going. It was more than I dared hope for. While the legal process churned on, I converted my spare bedroom into a makeshift lab. I maxed out a credit card for basic supplies, centrifuge, incubator, polymer reagents. It wasn't ideal, but it was mine. But the battle wasn't just professional. It was personal. Every time the phone rang, I jumped. I began checking the locks 3 times a night. I lost weight, stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. At one point, I caught myself flinching at the smell of coffee. The same brand Gregory always drank. That was when I found a trauma therapist. What you're feeling is normal, Dr. Simmons told me during our first session. Your workplace wasn't just a job, it was your purpose, and it turned against you. It's okay to grieve that. I did, in small, private moments. Then I went back to work. The first settlement offer came by certified mail, $75,000, and a strict non-disclosure agreement. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was insulting. Clara shredded it without a second glance. They think you're scared. They think money can buy silence. They're wrong. It would get worse before it got better. But I wasn't backing down. Not anymore. The second settlement offer was bigger. $200,000, the same gag order, the same demand for full patent transfer. They were desperate. Clara didn't even bring it to the table. They know they're losing, she said. This is a last-ditch bribe before things get public. And then, just as we prepared to go fully public with our case, Ardentia's legal team stepped in. We've reviewed your application, your backups, your recordings, their head counsel told me. Your claim is solid. More importantly, we're prepared to back you, financially and legally, in exchange for future licensing rights. That offer changed everything. With Ardentia's support, we filed a full countersuit: workplace assault, harassment, and attempted intellectual property theft. Clara drafted a detailed letter to the board, laying out the audio evidence, the tampering, the policy violations, the retaliation. Every line was razor sharp. When the news reached Metatronics, panic followed. Gregory called me personally. This time, I let it go to voicemail. And yes, I was still recording. You have no idea what you're doing, he hissed. We'll bury you in legal fees before this ever sees a courtroom. I forwarded the voicemail to Clara. She added it to the case file with a single note: pattern of intimidation. Jason agreed to testify, even knowing it would cost him. So did two former employees, Diane and, to my surprise, Eliza Crawford, the woman they'd erased from memory. They were ready to speak up. 6 months after I walked out of that building with coffee dripping down my blouse, I stood in my living room, watching the latest trial of my system deliver chemo markers to cancerous cells in synthetic tissue with 87% accuracy. That was the best night I'd had in a long time. And then came the moment everything turned. Metatronics, believing my recording was inadmissible under privacy law, allowed Gregory to testify under oath. He repeated his version. I had become agitated, knocked over the coffee, and stormed out irrationally. Clara waited until the last question was asked, then played the recording. Gregory's voice filled the room. Sign the patent or I'll ruin your career. Then the splash. My cry. His follow-up threat: that was an accident. If you tell anyone otherwise, no one will believe you. Silence. His lawyer called for a recess. But the damage was done. Industry outlets picked up the story within a week. Scientific American published a feature titled "Stolen Genius: The Price of Innovation in Corporate Labs." My face wasn't even on the cover, just a steaming cup of coffee. Metatronics' stock plummeted. Their board forced Gregory into resignation, citing personal conduct inconsistent with company values. Internal investigations began. The company, bleeding reputation, and investor trust, finally came to the table. Their offer: full recognition of my patent ownership, $2.7 million in damages, a formal public apology, and a licensing deal with strict limitations. Ardentia matched the licensing rate and went further, offering full funding for development, clinical trials, and a position as lead scientific advisor. I signed with them the same week. And then I got to work. I used part of the settlement to create the Whitaker Institute for Ethical Research, a foundation dedicated to protecting innovators, especially women in STEM. Our first initiative, a grant program paired with legal support for independent scientists. We didn't just fund research. We taught researchers how to defend it. Jason became head of our primary research division. Eliza joined our ethics board. Even Diane returned, this time on her terms. 3 years later, the FDA approved our targeted delivery system under the commercial name Oncotrace. Results exceeded expectations. Tumor reduction rates of 78%, with dramatically fewer side effects. Patients who had exhausted traditional therapies were suddenly seeing remission. One of them, Maya Ellison, a mother of 3, stood beside me at a press event, smiling through tears. "I saw my daughter graduate," she said, "because of this treatment, because of Lauren." The room clapped, but I could barely breathe. That single sentence carried more weight than all the lawsuits, the money, the headlines. On the first anniversary of our FDA approval, I visited my grandfather's grave. I brought flowers and the original lab notebook. I sat in the grass and whispered, "We did it." Not because of the system, but in spite of it. There are still days I flinch when a door slams, when coffee steams too hot. Trauma doesn't just fade. It embeds itself like scar tissue, but it doesn't own me anymore. At our monthly mentorship seminar for young researchers, I always end with the same advice. Document everything. Trust your gut. Know your rights before someone tries to take them. And never, ever trade your dignity for a title. Because you can lose jobs, lose funding, even lose years. But if you keep your voice, you can take it all back. Sometimes the worst day of your life is the day the world finally starts listening. And when they do, don't whisper. Make them hear you.